Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our first webinar series of the University of Minnesota Extension Strong Markets, Smart Moves Cattle Edition webinar series. Thank you for participating tonight. We appreciate your questions and look forward to engaging with you throughout tonight's presentation. Our beef team is with us here tonight. So the University of Minnesota Beef Team is a collection of extension educators and specialists located across the state. On your screen is a list of these educators who made this series possible. So thank you to everyone who is on tonight. And now I would like to welcome our presenters tonight. We have Dr. Angela Varnum and Melissa Runck. Dr. Angela Varnum is a livestock extension veterinarian for the University of Minnesota. She was previously in private practice in Minnesota seeing large animal species, including dairy, beef, small ruminants, and some equines. She graduated from Colorado State University's Doctor of Veterinary Medicine program after a career as a middle and high school teacher, and she really enjoys her new role educating producers in extension. Melissa Runck is the University of Minnesota Beef Production Systems Extension Educator based in Worthington, Minnesota. Melissa received her bachelor's in animal science from South Dakota State University and her master's of applied science in beef production specialization through the University of Nebraska-Lincoln with a minor in ruminant nutrition. She and her husband have a herd of Hereford and Simmental cows and row crop farm in southwestern Minnesota. So thank you to Dr. Angie and Melissa for being here tonight. And with that, I'll turn it over to you guys.
Thank you very much, Mercedes. We can go ahead and go to the next slide, and I'll go ahead and get us started off here tonight. Yeah, so Dr. Angie and I are going to be going back and forth here tonight, but just kind of an outline of everything that we're going to be covering. I'm going to be talking about some definitions because, of course, I want to make sure we're all on the same page when we get started here tonight. And what are some goals that we're trying to accomplish? Whether we are, are we trying to make the decision as the cattle owner? Are we trying to make the decision as far as what are we willing to invest if we're going to be buying a group of calves, and what kind of investment are we looking at? Going to talk about some best management practices as far as weaning management. What are some nutritional strategies that we should be mindful of? What are some vaccines and parasite control that we want to be implementing? And we're going to spend a good chunk of time just because we know that this has been one of those topics that has really producers have a lot of questions on in regards to BRD. And then we're going to just spend some time talking about making that decision to precondition calves. So whether you are the producer who is curious, and thinking about it in these high calf markets, should I be making that investment, whether it's my time, energy, resources, into preconditioning my calves, if I'm going to be getting good good money for my calves regardless. If you are the person who is trying to pull the trigger and make a decision on what kind of calves am I going to be bringing into my lot this year, what kind of calves am I willing to pay that premium for, and does it actually pay? Or should I be looking at maybe not paying that premium and taking on some higher risk calves? So we're going to talk about all that tonight, just because that is a topic that we as a beef team have felt that, we've had a lot of questions on this. We are in such an anomaly with the markets where they are currently at, and there's just a lot of decision-making things that are on the table right now that we need to discuss. So just an outline of what we hope to be covering tonight. So go ahead and go to the next slide. So this is just because I'm very much a visual person here. This is just a kind of just a rough drawing here of what some of the common Minnesota beef production systems look like. So over on the left, looking at our cow calf producer, and we've got our weaned calves there. And which which route are we going to be taking with those weaned calves? So when we are going, the cow calf producer taking those newly weaned calves, or coming right off the cow, they're not weaned. Those are considered our high risk calves. High risk because there's a lot going on there. Dr. Angie's going to talk about all the different stressors that are impacting those calves, all the things that they are dealing with from an immunological standpoint. But those are high risk calves because nothing has been done with them essentially. And then we're going into the feedlot with them. The other route that we could be taking with these calves is doing some sort of like a 45-day preconditioning and backgrounding protocol with those calves. Those are, we term those preconditioned or low risk calves because we've taken that risk out of them because we have spent the time, the resources on those calves so that the feedlot, that they're going into, so that they are, don't have as much risk associated with those animals. Okay, less stressors impacting them. We could also have the route, seen through the middle with the dash line as far as, we've got those calves, and then they could potentially go to a backgrounder who is going to incur that risk before they send those animals off to the feedlot for finishing. So go ahead and go to the next slide. So, what is preconditioning? Um, the word preconditioning itself, so we are pre-vaccinating and we are conditioning those calves. What are we conditioning them to do? We're basically conditioning them to, how do they respond to those stressors given a certain situation. Preconditioning is that term that is often used to describe those management practices that are being done to those calves either prior to or around the time of weaning. Then we're trying to improve that calf's immune system and minimize the stress in order to decrease their morbidity and their mortality. It does not look the same from operation to operation. Like there's no cookie cutter protocol. There are some, there are some pretty well known preconditioning protocols, but it's never going to look the same from every outfit to from what you're doing compared to what your neighbors are doing. Not going to look the same from one place to the next. So it really comes down to, a 45-day or more weaning period. And Angie's going to talk a little bit more about why, historically that used to be a 30-day weaning period and why that got increased, why they basically added 2 more weeks to that, just because they saw the decrease in the mortality or the morbidity rates with those calves that have been weaned a little bit longer. It's likely going to include some sort of a vaccination protocol. The nutrition, what are we feeding these calves before they go on to, that next point, whether it's a, background or into the feedlot? Are those calves bunk broke? Do they know how to find feed? Are they castrated? Deworming. And then this usually is kind of one of those that gets put on the back burner a little bit, but just given the new rules and regulations, what kind of identification do these calves need to have as they are leaving our operation? So, and it comes down to, what facilities do you have? What skills do you have? What time do you have to invest in them? So, okay, yes, the next slide, please. So we're gonna roll right into what are some of those best practices in regards to some weaning management, nutrition, and vaccines. So we're gonna get started right off the bat with castration. So, if we are talking about, castration, we don't really can't, if we're referring to our spring calving herds, we don't really have the option of doing early castration anymore because if we haven't castrated them, that ship has sailed. We're now referring to them as being late castrated. So we're referring to those male calves. I'm not talking about bull calves. If you're keeping them for bull calves, that's not what we're talking about here. Because I've had that question before, but when we're talking about early castrated male calves, those would be the ones that are either in our spring calving herds, they're castrated either at birth or at spring turnout or spring, vaccination time, versus their late castrated male counterparts that are left intact over the summer while they're on mom. And then we're either castrating them, at the time of weaning or we're pushing onto the feedlot and they're going to have to do it. Okay. So just a little bit of data on those early castrated males versus their late castrated counterparts. In a study that one of the studies that I'm going to reference here, they found that those early, the whole general mentality there is that if we're leaving them intact, we're getting that extra boost from testosterone in terms of performance. And oh gosh, they're going to perform so much better. So I'm going to have these calves that are going to weigh up heavier when I bring them in the fall. However, what they found due to the stress factor that those males undergo at the time when they do actually end up getting castrated then later in the fall is that compared to their early castrated steers, they actually gained 0.35 pounds less per day compared to those steers that had been castrated early on. They also found that those late castrated bull calves had a 92% greater incidence of morbidity versus the early castrated steers. And they also found that the late castrated bulls should be discounted when we're comparing all of the stressors that, from an economical standpoint, when we're comparing the two, those late castrated bulls need to be discounted on average, uh, basically 25 cents per pound compared to those early castrated steers, just due to overall loss in performance and the higher chance of morbidity. It also, we have a lot more issues when we have heavier calves. So let's, think of like your peewee type calves, like your 4.5 weights, your 5 weight calves versus like say, 7.5 weight calf. We're going to have experience more stress and more of a drag on performance on those heavier steers than we are our lighter calves. They just get so much more stressed out. I don't know, it's a more painful process, but anyway, we see higher stress, more reduced performance, and greater morbidity risk. Dr. Brad White from KSU is a vet there. He pointed out in an article that came out not too long ago that uncastrated bulls are 2.3 times more likely to develop BRD compared to steers. So very significant. We can go on to the next slide here. So another preconditioning practice that we that should be done to these calves, bunk breaking. Much like grazing is very much a learned behavior, so is being able to find that bunk and get up there and be eating when we ask them to. Even if we don't even have to have this, we can be doing this while they're on the cow. Maybe this is as a baby. Maybe they go back into the pen that they were in, when they were young calves before they went out to grass. It's really hard to assign a dollar value to this exclusively, just because we can't quite directly tie it to, some calves get more stressed when they get weaned than others. So we can't necessarily contribute a dollar value to it, but just know it is increasingly important, just because we have that increased risk of acidosis caused by calves overeating. When we have those aggressive calves that go up, they find that bunk, and if we do have some sort of a concentrate in there or some sort of a highly, readily fermentable feed product in there, something that's really palatable, and those aggressive eaters go in there, they overeat, it's going to increase our chances of those calves having subacute acidosis. Hopefully, that it's not subacute, not acute. So subacute acidosis is going to occur when those cattle eat too much of a rapidly fermentable feed, and like grain or maybe even silage too quickly. Excuse me, the rumen pH is going to drop. That's going to cause their appetite to go down. They're going to have off feed periods, loose manure. They're basically going to have a gut ache. They're not going to feel good. So what do? They're kind of laggard. They're off. They're not eating. And then that gives those less aggressive calves more of an opportunity to come up, and then they overeat. And it's just kind of a cycle till we get that all straightened out. The Iowa Beef Center has done some studies on this, and they found that just one case of subacute acidosis, because cattle can have multiple bouts of this going on, and we really see this going into cases of like bad weather when cattle like will overeat, overconsume. It's going to cost you roughly $10 to $20 per incidence that this happens. So that can really add up very quickly. So go ahead and go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So with that same, keeping in mind, just being bunk broke, there was a study done by K-State where that showed that being pre-exposed to eating from a feed bunk has a positive influence on calf feeding behavior. So basically, teaching them how to find that bunk beforehand was a really good thing. So they did this study, and the green line on this graph here, those were calves that all these calves were weaned for 28 days before they went to the feedlot. Those calves on the green line, they were weaned in a dry lot with mom. They were getting fed in a bunk. They knew how to find that bunk. The blue line shows those calves that were weaned on pasture, but they were given a supplement before they moved into the feedlot. Those calves on red, they were weaned on pasture and had no exposure to any sort of a supplement, had no exposure to any sort of feed. What they show here is that it's very clearly showing that the percentage of calves who were able to find that bunk once they got into that feedlot on from day 1 through 7, that first week they were there in the feedlot, much higher chance of being able to find that bunk if they had been pre-exposed to it. Now, those calves that had been given a supplement, they knew how to find feed, they just didn't know where the feed bunk was at. They started off really low, but then you can see they basically, almost caught up to those calves that were weaned in a dry lot. So just, that practice of being able to find the bunk and then also being able to know like what is feed and how do I consume it. Like I said, those are both learned behaviors and very much has a positive influence on that calf feeding behavior. So if we can go and go to the next slide, please. So just some things to keep in mind because we could have a whole presentation on these weaning and arrival diets. But if we are, if we're going to be preconditioning and weaning those calves, or even if we're having them in for a very small amount of time before we, send them to, we got somebody buying them off the farm, whatever, we want to make sure, especially like this year, because every year's got its unique challenges, we want to make sure that we are feeding them good hay. Think forage, not just roughage. We want to be really mindful of like our CRP hays that we might have been putting up. Everybody had rained on hay this year. That long, stemmy, mature, really coarse hay, what that can essentially do to those calves that like, yeah, so we want to avoid risk of acidosis. We want to make sure we got room and buffer and all that. But we also have to make sure that it essentially doesn't take more energy to break down that forage than what they're getting from it. We don't want to backlog that system with indigestible forage that is basically, like a log jam there. We just can't get it out until they break it down. But it's so coarse, stemmy, mature, it's got a high lignin content. We want to be really mindful of that. We also want to consider, our protein feeds with minimal starch and that are high in digestible fiber. Um, Dr. Garland Dalkey had just done an article here not too long ago. We want to make sure that talking about some of these, receiving calf diets, we want to be waiting to feed supplements containing urea. Just because we want to make sure that they just need to be withheld initially, like urea, NPN, non-protein nitrogen. It does take some further adjustment and an abundance of readily fermentable non-structural carbohydrates, which we don't want those in like our initial receiving ration. So just be mindful of that. We want to make sure that we are providing that we have access to salt that is near the water. We got to make sure that they are getting rehydrated. We need that sodium for the sodium ion transport that is like happening for every process, inside the cells. They've got to get salt into them. We want to make sure that we are waiting at least 3 to 5 days to make any changes to their arrival diet. Just because it does take some time for those rumen microbes to adjust. We don't want to do anything too quickly. So when we're looking at our bunk space, we want to make sure that we're considering our bunk space on a per head basis. How much do we actually have in linear inches? Do we have enough? Ideally, all the calves can get up there and eat at the same time if they want, and we adjust our ration accordingly based on that. However, a lot of our setups, we're not going to have that kind of space, and we're going to rely on the fact that some calves are going to, come up and eat, and then the next calves are going to have to take their turn. And we need to make sure that our diet is adjusted so that those animals can eat to satiety. They can eat to however full they want to be without having that risk of an acidosis. So our aggressive eaters don't come up and eat all the good stuff, and then essentially all the poorer quality stuff, they sort it out and leave it for the less aggressive eaters. We don't want that happening. So, all right, that is all I've got for weaning and arrival diet. So I will turn it over to Dr. Angie.
Great. Thanks, Melissa. And I was just sitting here thinking how it's fun to be up here with you and be joined by Troy as well, who will be presenting next week. Because while I was in practice, I benefited from quite a few beef extension resources and webinars such as these. I was asked to speak a little bit about the health side as a veterinarian of preconditioning. And I just want to start with the caveat that this is my bias, which is that it's really a lot more than, which shot do I pick, doc? If you think of the preconditioning protocols that you're utilizing as a three-legged stool, just generally speaking, if one of those legs of the stool goes kaput, the other two legs aren't going to be enough to really hold that calf up and make your practices as valuable as they could be. And so don't forget about the stress. That would be the number one thing I would stress, no pun intended. You can fine tune your nutrition and your health protocols, absolutely, but only if you're doing that within the context of minimizing stress for your young calves. Deworming is another huge health area that we really won't do it justice here tonight. And I can sense that could be another topic to discuss as some of those protocols have changed recently that you'll be hearing from your veterinarian. And then also the topic of dehorning. That's another health event in the calf's life that we really won't have a lot of time to get into tonight. All of those things impacting how well the animal is able to utilize their nutrition and respond to vaccines given the stress of, for example, a dehorning procedure. Ideally, dehorning is done by the time that you're preconditioning calves anyway. Let's jump into that fact of why are we talking about 45-day weaning periods now when we're talking about preconditioning? Melissa's right. There's a range of possibilities here when we're talking about preconditioning timelines. However, for the majority of the full premiums that you'll be able to take advantage of in most programs, it's typically 45 days here in the US. Can you derive some benefit from a shorter preconditioning period? Probably. And again, it goes back to that stress mitigation discussion. But I really think of the reason that this has shifted to a 45-day recommendation or more is for two reasons. One is that calves' immune system is being developed, is being refined during this 45 days. If you give a calf a shot, it's not an immediate shield. And most of you know this, but it's nice to be reminded because we wish it was. We wish it was an immediate defense against disease. But of course, you know that a vaccination, a shot into an animal, is really more of a signal. It's a signal to initiate a biological reaction, which isn't fully complete for about 2 to 4 weeks, depending on the type of immunization we're giving. And that's, of course, because the animal has to have time in order to mount an immune response for its immune system to, let's say, be activated by producing the antibodies that are shown on the right-hand side of this timeline. So for the animal to be vaccinated just means he had a shot, but for him to be fully immune, it takes about a month. And that's not even considering that some of our vaccines require a booster. And so each time that shot is, or that, let's say, intranasal product is entering the animal, I should say shot. Each time that vaccine is entering the animal via injection, you can count on it taking at bare minimum 2 weeks for that animal to be fully protected. Now, keep in mind that, again, we'd love it to be a shield that's immediate. That doesn't happen in most cases. And we'd also love shots, vaccinations to be 100% effective, but we're pretty lucky if about 70 to 80% of the animals respond when we're vaccinating any one herd. That's not really from a specific disease vaccine standpoint. That's simply how vaccinology works. And so we're going for that herd immunity effect here. So just think about this. Currently, some, maybe many calves receive their primary vaccination as they're transported or as they're transitioning between segments of the supply chain. They're under stress and a pathogen load. And so if you're castrating them, vaccinating them, and sticking them on the trailer, your vaccines probably aren't giving you the best bang for your buck. Calves typically maintain pretty good health on their ranch of origin. However, when they start to go some various stressors, let's say like weaning, or you could put any stressor in for this, shipping, mixing of animals, their immunity and their disease resistance, their ability to fight disease will be challenged. So on the left side of the screen is a chart. The gray line or the upper line is charting the calf's immune response typically. He's chugging along, or she, and is having a growing immune response thanks to the antibodies provided by its mother, and then maybe some dips or valleys in the road. But really, that immune response tends to start decreasing the older the calf gets and the further away from that first initial booster of antibodies, being colostrum, that calf arrives. Just around that time, just serendipitously around that time is when we're subjecting these calves to the highest pathogen levels or the highest levels of disease from being weaned and being mixed with new groups of calves. And so the idea of preconditioning, of course, on the right-hand side of the screen, is that as those pathogen challenges or as those disease challenges are occurring, we're also boosting that calf's immune system at a level that reflects the challenge to come. I like to sort of play devil's advocate here, and I think Melissa will do that later as well, which is that in my research and just common sense experience tells me that probably the most important factor here in a preconditioning program is the length of time that you're giving the calves to be weaned prior to the main stressful event, which is shipping and mixing of calves. In a study which is now dated, but it provides a good visual for this point, and I'm really unaware of any more recent studies that looked at this. We found that when 86 steer calves were, 88 were weaned and immediately shipped. That's that wean group. So they didn't have any vaccines and they didn't have any preconditioning. And then 88 of them were weaned 45 days before shipping without vaccines. And lastly, 75 head were weaned, vaccinated with a modified live viral vaccine, and held on the ranch for 45 days before shipping. So they were like the wean 45 group, but they also received a vaccine. That study actually noticed no significant difference between those weaned calves who were preconditioned in a full 45-day plus vaccine program there on the right, and the calves who were simply weaned for 45 days without vaccines. So there was no significant difference in morbidity once these calves got to the feedlot between taking that longer weaning period and taking that longer weaning period with vaccines. So I would argue that it might just be that the calves are able to respond to the vaccines better because they were weaned for 45 days and they stayed put. Keep throwing out this word stressors, and just to put it all on the table for you, these could be the stressors that are thrown at a calf in a non-preconditioning program, a calf without preconditioning. Now, a little stress is actually good for the immune system, but chronic or inundating stress can be overwhelming and pretty much just X's out whatever you're doing with your vaccines. A general rule of thumb that's been touted by Extension and some veterinarians is to plan to never stack more than 3 stressors together on top of restraint, but it really depends on what the kind of stress is. I've kind of highlighted this dehorning here because it's known to be one of the most stressful events to calves and one of those events in which they're releasing the most cortisol, stress hormone. And so although we're really not talking about it tonight, there's great value in having that taken care of before you're bringing your calf into your preconditioning program. Why would you work with a veterinarian to design vaccine protocols? And am I going to give you an ideal vaccine protocol here tonight? You bet no, because most of the time vaccine protocols in cattle, in beef cattle, are pretty darn dependent on the actual operation. Now, there are a couple of tips that I'm going to share that are tend to kind of be universal here. But in a meta-analysis, a review of about 260, 270 scientific papers on bovine respiratory disease risk factors, or BRD, that were correlated between 1990 and 2021. Only of the studies that specifically looked at vaccines, of course, there were studies looking at bunk breaking and dehorning stress and all those other factors. Of the studies who looked at vaccination, a reasonably small percentage were actual field trials. So they were maybe more controlled studies, not taking place in field conditions. A pretty low number were actually field trials. And even though they might have shown statistical relevance, if this study wasn't conducted on a herd that mimics your own herd, it's really hard to make inferences um, between different studies if the risk factors don't mimic what you have going on yourself. I will say, however, I always like to put the plug in that your only free vaccine is colostrum. And so this is bringing it all the way back. Remember that that beef calf that receives timely and high quality colostrum from a cow who was selected for her ability to provide that is still your best bet when providing what that calf needs in order to have a healthy and functioning immune system. But here are my 4 keeps about vaccines. Again, you can pretty much count on canceling out all of that money that you're spending on your vaccines if you're not planning how to use them appropriately. You guys know this. Keep them cool. I wish that we had some kind of sponsorship from Yeti, but we don't. This is just to remind you that vaccines can't freeze. Perhaps most importantly, be cautious of that point or overheat. Can't leave them in your truck. What do I mean by keep them separate? Keep them separate, number 1, from other stressors. And then number 2, not in the same syringe. Think 2 weeks ahead. So keep yourself 2 weeks ahead at minimum. Even better if you keep yourself 4 weeks ahead. And what I mean by that is simply remember that that calf will not have the immunity until about 2 weeks from then. So plan ahead 2 weeks before a stressor or 2 weeks before when you need that calf to have the vaccine benefits on board and vaccinate them at that time, not right at the moment. It's always easier said than done, but it is important to think in those 2-week increments if at all possible. And then lastly, keep good records, which I know Melissa will talk about in a bit. This is just a reminder to us that at that time when you're vaccinating your calves, it's a great time to make certain that each of them has the necessary identification, especially if they'll be crossing state lines. But it's a good recommendation for all calves. As of November 5th last year, so about a year ago, just a reminder that the USDA made that federal rule requiring the use of RFID tags. How do you know if it's an RFID tag? Typically a 15-digit number that's preceded by Minnesota's code, which is 840, as you can see in that photo at the right. And I typically look as well for that shield with the US in the middle of that shield. And so that's keeping our calves identified, or our cows identified through all stages of the system. So what are we vaccinating for when we're preconditioning calves? This is specific to the preconditioning phase. BRD, or as I mentioned, bovine respiratory disease, we're typically vaccinating for the big 4 viruses known as BVD, viral and diarrhea, IBR, infectious bovine rhinotracheitis, parainfluenza or PI3, and bovine respiratory syncytial virus. Now, you will see most of the time, not always, these 4 viruses are grouped together in one vaccine, which could be a 4-way, it could be a 5-way or more. But those are your standard viral vaccines for bovine respiratory disease. I know to expect some questions about other vaccines for BRD, including Mannheimia and maybe Pasteurella, which are bacterial. We think back to what happens when an animal is infected with BRD. that animal probably has a mix of viral and bacterial infection, making him succumb to the disease. And so although there are some vaccines for the bacterial agents, in general, the viral vaccines are still the foundation, the cornerstone. At that time, you may be considering a Clostridial vaccine, which is a vaccine against Clostridial bacterial toxins. Commonly, you'll use blackleg to describe that vaccine, or overeating. And then the third category specifically for replacement heifers would be lepto or leptospirosis protection, which is important especially in breeding animals. Now, there are some preconditioning programs that require at least 2 doses of Clostridial, 2 doses of a 5-way modified live virus vaccine, and at least 1 dose of a bacterial vaccine, plus that 45-day weaning for those guaranteed premiums. So when you're selecting that vaccine, either with the help of your veterinarian or perhaps you're looking for yourself, just remember that in general, there are 2 main types in the BRD world at this time: modified live and killed. There's no one size fits all for this. And that's the benefit of listening to an extension talk versus a pharmaceutical talk, is that we don't have any vested interest in any of these companies. But even then, I tend to think of modified live as being those vaccines that I can get away with giving my calf just 1 dose of. Now, you'll see the caveat there that you might have, it might be recommended to you to actually give multiple doses of some modified live vaccines, even though they might be labeled for just 1 dose and you're done. That tends to be because of the fact I mentioned earlier that no vaccine is 100% effective. So most herdsmen who are giving multiple modified live vaccines are doing it to hedge their bets. They're hoping that at least one of those 2 boosters or one of those 3 boosters is enough that the calf needs to be fully covered when it comes to his biggest stressors. Modified live vaccines in general tend to have a little bit longer duration and a single-use bottle, which cuts down on their convenience. So once you pull out that modified live vaccine, you combine it with the adjuvant, you're pretty much done. You cannot continue to use that bottle on a future calf unless it's the same day. So you may end up with some wasted doses if you're not calculating carefully. Killed vaccines, on the other hand, we learned about this in vet school, as typically they're the ones that are safest for pregnant animals. It's not an important point necessarily in our discussion today, but they're in general just a little bit safer in case you're unsure what the history of that animal is. But they tend to require, or they do require, boosters. Unlike the modified live vaccines, killed vaccines are you can pretty much guarantee that they're going to require a booster for full effect. These vaccines are a little bit more expensive, but their bottle is multi-use. So if you grab a bottle and you have a group of calves to do, and maybe a group of calves later, you can typically count on being able to use that bottle for both groups of calves. And I took the liberty to draft up a general vaccine protocol. I told you I wouldn't give you one custom made for your operation. In general, if you're vaccinating a calf that's less than 2 months of age, you'll typically hear the recommendation to not give that calf a modified live vaccine, or MLV, because of the chance for that vaccine to counteract the antibodies from mom's milk, mom's colostrum. After about that 2 to 3 month mark, you should be safe to give a modified live vaccine with certain caveats. You may be instructed to consider boosters on those at about the 1 to 2 month mark, up to 3 boosters, and that just depends on your operation type. A couple of tips. If your calf is already stressed, or your calves, excuse me, are already stressed, well, I don't know, maybe you just have one. If your animals are already stressed, consider consider a killed vaccine. There is some research to suggest that especially the BRSV and BVD in those modified live vaccines can lead to a cytokine storm in a really stressed calf, which just means they get sick from it. If you're giving a killed vaccine, in that case, remember that you have the responsibility to booster it to fully be following the label on that product. And if you're concerned about BVD, or bovine viral diarrhea virus, that's the virus that I couldn't get out of my mouth earlier, but that's one of the 4 that cause BRD. You may be better off with a modified live vaccine than a killed vaccine, but a killed vaccine is still better than no vaccine. So let's summarize, and then I'll pass it back to Melissa. When we're talking about vaccines and stress, I had to throw it in here, Melissa. Remember that they're under pressure. So I kind of use the rule of 2s. If you can, vaccinate well in advance of a stress in that calf's life, minimum 2 weeks before. And if you're not going to get it done, don't vaccinate those calves on arrival at the feedlot. It's better to give them a couple days, let's say 2 days for ease, after that stressful event, if you didn't get it done with enough forethought, shall we say. And then I would just say it's a suggestion of 3s, which is that general suggestion of minimizing the number of stressful things you're doing at once, especially if you're expecting your vaccines to work to their full potential. So this is just kind of what I said. You can expect that preconditioning will limit stress. You can't always expect that it will pay. You can't expect that vaccines will always work, but you can expect that they will work better in preconditioned calves. And remember, that's just because of that herd immunity response. We put too much pressure on our vaccines, expecting them to work in 100% of the time in 100% of calves. And hopefully now you have some of those strategies to make whatever investments you're making in your vaccines work even harder. And with that, I'll pass it back to you, Melissa.
Thank you, Dr. Angie. So continuing with kind of that theme, we're on the topic, we're talking about BRD. Why are we spending so much time talking about that? Well, as Dr. Angie really alluded to, that that's one of those main things that we have got to get a handle on. It is, without a doubt, it is that single largest health issue that faces our beef industry. BRD alone counts for a roughly 75% morbidity and 50 to 70% mortality in our feedlots. That is huge. I mean, without even having to show up on your farm to do a necropsy. I mean, your vet can pretty much guess what it's gonna be from. It costs our U.S. feedlot industry $800 to $900 million annually, and the way that it affects our industry is through decreased animal production. So, which I've got some information on that, but just in terms of overall lost performance from those calves, increased days on feed. We'll talk about some of those, the carcass characteristics too, but increased treatment costs. Of course, it is not free to run out there every time and inject them with something to try to treat them. And then, of course, so what are our labor costs? What time does it take to get out there and be, first of all, watching for those calves, but then second of all, making those pulls to treat them and handle those sick calves. We can go ahead and go to the next slide here. So it is just, continuing on with BRD. As our number of BRD treatments and the severity of those lung lesions, because that's what's overall, what's happening is that we're getting those lung lesions, that we're not going to see, of course, until at harvest. As the number of treatments and the severity of those lung lesions increase, both our clinical and our subclinical BRD instances will have a negative impact on that animal's performance. Like I said, more days on feed, like we're having that reduced average daily grain. It's going to take longer to finish them out. We're also going to see reduced marbling, and then lighter hot carcass weight if we are taking all them out at the same time, and then an overall reduced carcass value. And you're probably thinking, well, why aren't we just sorting for these if we're pulling them off? Well, the reason is because we have our clinical and our subclinical incidences of BRD. So we may notice the symptoms, like in our clinical cases, like we can see, okay, that calf is sick. We're going to pull them out. We're going to treat them. But what they found in one particular study was that approximately half of the animals that went to harvest had lung lesions at the time. When they harvested them, they showed no clinical signs of BRD, meaning that they didn't catch those symptoms, so they didn't get treated. So what that's telling us is that a very large proportion of these animals with subclinical BRD symptoms is going undetected. So even if you think that you're going to skip that step and I'm just going to go ahead and pull those calves out, I'm going to treat them as I see the symptoms arise. I'm going to manage it that way. Just manage it really well. Well, even in the really the highly managed lots, they weren't making enough of those pulls. Still, half the animals were going undetected. So just really good observation still isn't enough to reduce those cases. So if we go to the next slide here, and if we're looking at like dollars and cents, what is BRD actually going to be costing us? This was a different study that they looked at the number of treatments and, first, second, and then 3+ treatments for BRD. What was that impact on average daily gain? I converted that over to pounds per day. And I just because I wanted to know kind of what is that costing me on a per day, per head basis. I just used, average prices from last week for a 6 weight calf at Sioux Falls Regional, and this just breaks it down. So the first treatment is going to cost me $1.83. This next time I got to come in and treat that calf is going to cost me almost $3. Third plus treatment, that's what we're losing out in on performance just from the symptoms of BRD and that decrease in average daily gain. So we can go ahead and go to the next slide here. And like Dr. Angie said earlier, we're going to try to play a devil's advocate here because we know that there is no one size fits all for every operation. And, she's not going to make one blanket statement as far as what products you need to be giving. And we're not going to come right out here and say that preconditioning is for every operation because maybe it isn't. Maybe based on your setup, it doesn't work. But what are some instances, like I said, we're just playing devil's advocate here, when does it pay to not precondition those calves? And there is data out there that shows that there are some instances where those non-preconditioned cattle, they can have a small probability of generating higher net returns for a finished animal. Okay. Once they, assuming that we have no more mortality in them, but we get them to the get them harvested there versus their preconditioned counterparts, and that is coming from somebody who took a chance on a preconditioned calf, and basically they didn't have to incur those extra premiums. So they got a cheaper calf and a non-preconditioned animal. Like I said, made it all the way to harvest, and so they did make up a little bit higher net return on those calves. Is it risky? Absolutely. But if you are a risk taker, then that works for you. Maybe you have ample labor management to monitor for those sick calves. Maybe also you're sending them to some place that uses a higher tier antibiotic receiving protocol. So, we got our kind of our lower tier antibiotics. Maybe they're using kind of some higher tier top shelf antibiotics, metaphylaxis. They're treating everybody with it to get everything out of them. Maybe that works for them. Also, in some instances, maybe those extra days on feed could potentially cause some fleshy calves. Just in some casual conversations with people that, some of my connections at, some of these auction markets. In this market, are we seeing really fleshy calves? Maybe not. People are kind of viewing them as more healthy calves. They got a little bit extra condition on them. So take that for what it's worth. And then also, Dr. Angie talked a lot about that extra, a 45-day protocol versus 30 days. Just thinking ahead, where does that extra time put you at in the market? It's a little bit more time. Are you going to be selling them around the holidays where maybe the market tapers off a little bit? I don't know, just some things to consider about. Like I said, we're not trying to make a blanket statement that says that it works for absolutely everybody, but just some things to be mindful of as you're considering this. So as we go to the next slide here, uh, just this is just a kind of a take-home piece here, but preconditioning calves really protects your assets in these high dollar markets, not just adds to it. It is a level of risk protection that is, if you're trying to avoid some of that risk with these super high prices, it's definitely something you need to be thinking about. This came from one of the studies. I really like this, but if there is perfect information on the preconditioning status and performance of preconditioned animals across the beef value chain, we should expect all preconditioned animals to receive a price premium sufficiently high to incentivize preconditioning. Doesn't tell you a lot, but just in general, basically uh, we need to be as producers, we need to be getting paid for those preconditioning practices. If I am trying to buy calves to go into my feedlot and feed them out, I've got to be making sure that I am paying up for those calves because somebody else took the time and the resources and put it into those calves so that I to help mitigate my risk. This came from that same study, but the average price premium received for preconditioned calves has been estimated to range between about $10.50 to about $19.50 per hundredweight, just in the study that they looked at from 2011 to 2019. Okay, so if we go to the next slide here, what is our premium, going to depend on? Well, it's going to depend on that feedlot operator's willingness to pay. What this study looked at is it was about 8,400 different simulations, and it was sort of like a survey. To summarize it, it was a study that measured feedlot operators' willingness to pay for preconditioned calves based on different price points in the market and what kind of level of risk they were willing to take on. Okay, this practice, they measured this, like I said, there's a lot of data, a lot of different data points from 2014 to 2018. So again, keep in mind, different markets than what we're at now. But what they found was that for a risk neutral feedlot operator, so I don't want to say like they're, risk takers, um, they were willing to pay about $50 per head for preconditioned cattle. And that just came from a difference in the expected net return. They were willing to take a little bit more of incur some of that risk. Now, the risk averse feedlot operator, meaning that I'm going to pony up and I'm going to pay more for these calves because I want to avoid that risk. As their certainty equivalent decreased, they want to avoid that decrease in their net revenue. So they don't want to lose money. So they were willing to pay up closer to $90 per head for those preconditioned calves. So if we go ahead and move on to the next slide here, what is the takeaway? Dr. Angie said this, numerous times, but what can't we influence? We have no control over the price premium that we're going to get for our preconditioned calves. What can we try to influence? We can try to go to market with a healthy calf, a vigorous calf, and we can have impact over the number of pounds that we are selling. Those premiums paid for those preconditioned calves, of course, it's going to vary because there's so many factors that are coming into play here because no two operations are alike. But to put it in perspective, this is coming from Superior Livestock, some data that they had back in 1994. They found that people were willing to pay about a quarter per hundredweight in terms of a price premium for preconditioned calves. In 2012, when they ended this study, it was upwards of $12 per 100 pounds. So like I said, there's a big range, and people are willing to pay more for something that they know is going to decrease their risk. So we go on to the next slide here. Uh, Documentation matters. It's not just one thing to go to the sale barn and say, "Oh yeah, these calves are vaccinated." Well, what on earth does that mean? You, at a minimum, need to be sending this information with your calves. And you can tell my age here. We like to converse in memes here. I thought this one was very, very fitting. Um, but we need to make sure that we're telling what's the birth date range of those calves, what's their genetic makeup, what products did it give them at birth, and then at spring turnout, are they castrated and when? Have they been weaned and for how long? What vaccinations did they get in the fall? Are they implanted or are they non-hormone treated cattle? Buyers want product names. It does matter because that's going to tell them, as Dr. Angie spoke a lot about, modified live killed vaccine is going to tell you what kind of product they have had administered. Shameless plug, put in your producer BQA number. And then this is Dr. Eric Mosel's like golden rule here. You've got to be present at the time of sale. You've got to be there to stand behind your calves to represent them. And at minimum, if you can't, absolutely can't be there, you got to send this information along so that they have that with them. So, got to make sure that it's not just a simple like, yep, these calves have been vaccinated. Buyers want to know with what. So, all right, as we move in, that kind of wraps up our presentation part of it. So Dr. Angie and I at this time would be happy to open it up to any questions.
Okay. In regards to questions, I'm actually not seeing any right now, but if anyone does have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat and let us know so we can get those answered for you. All right, not seeing any, we're just going to go ahead and close us out for the night. So once again, thank you for attending and participating in the first presentation of the UMN Extension Speak webinar series. This presentation has been recorded and everyone who registered online will receive a link to the recording from tonight's presentation after the conclusion of this webinar series. Again, thank you for joining us tonight and we look forward to seeing you during the next one.